afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Philip Phillips, and I'm the Associate Dean of the University Honors College, and I'm pleased to welcome you to our fall lecture series on global engagement. It's my pleasure to welcome back Dr. Rebekka King. Dr. King received her PhD in Religious Studies from the University of Toronto. She had a postdoctoral fellowship at the Candler School of Theology at Emory University. She is currently an assistant professor in the Department of Philosophy and Religious Studies here at MTSU, where she teaches courses on global Christianity, Judaism and Islam, comparative religions, religion in film, the figure of Jesus, and the academic discipline of religious studies. A cultural anthropologist, Dr. King examines the negotiation of boundaries within contemporary North American Christianity. Her first book, which is under contract by NYU Press, outlines the development of progressive Christianity as a variety of Christianity that is simultaneously secular and religious. Her second major project explores the synthesis of Judaism, indigenous religions, and Christianity within a movement known as Jewish Affinity Christianity. Dr. King currently serves as the co-chair of the Sociology of Religion section of the American Academy of Religion. She is an editor of Critical Research on Religion, a member of our honors faculty, and also a member of our honors council. So on behalf of the University Honors College, I'd like to welcome you here today. And her talk will be Memory, Representation, and Political Conflict, a case study of Buddhist monks in southern Thailand. Let's welcome our speaker.
All right, thank you to the Honors College, to Dr. Phillips and Dean Weil for having me. I'm pleased to see some of my current and former students in the room, so hello, thank you for coming. Can everyone hear me okay? Yep. All right. So today we're going to be talking about, I'm so bad at slideshows. My students, people who have taken my classes are probably wondering why I have a slideshow. But part of it is because I really want us to think about the role of images. So we'll be looking at a series of pictures throughout this slideshow. Most of them are innocuous, several of them are humorous. There are a couple that have some images that you may see as violent, so I will give you forewarning before we get to any violent images. So when we think about Buddhism, we tend to think of it as a peaceful religion. Our popular imagination evokes images of the Dalai Lama smiling, a series of monks deep in meditation, the wise sayings of the Buddha himself as the religious founder, or the compassionate devotion of bodhisattvas. These are holy individuals or holy men who, prior to achieving enlightenment, make a vow to return to earth and to remain, to guide the rest of us to enlightenment, and to remain until every single blade of grass has achieved enlightenment. So we tend to have these images that sort of romanticize Buddhism. Well, most of you are probably too young to remember. One of the first images of Buddhism that captured Americans' hearts occurred in the lead up to the war in Vietnam. And the first image is going to be an image that's a little bit distressing. This is an image of Qin Duke in Vietnam, who was protesting the persecution of Buddhist monks and committed an act of self-immolation in that context. This image kind of captured the American imagination and turned our direction over to that part of the world. At the time that the image was released, John Kennedy said that it was sort of an image that had changed history, right? That it could never be forgotten, and everything was different from that point on. Here are a series of images of a friend of mine who is a Terawatt Buddhist monk. Those of you who have taken classes with me have heard me speak lovingly of Bhante. Bhante is a devotional term that means venerable one or venerable sir that we used in a way very similar to how Catholics call their priest father. In these images, you can see he's involved in regular, everyday activities that we might attribute to monks, right? So here he is at a meditation session. Here he is receiving offerings, washing his face. Here's a picture he's actually taken of a series of monks on a bus and then leading some Dharma talks in upstate New York. And so in this way, he does seem to appear to be a very typical monk, right? This is, if you were asked to describe a monk, this is what you would expect to see. And Bhante is also a graduate student at Arizona State University, and we met a number of years ago at the University of Toronto when we were both doing graduate degrees there. And here are some images of him that are perhaps a little less monk-like, right? You can see there he is in Times Square with the Cookie Monster and Elmo. There he is at a pride parade, at the bar. I don't think he himself is drinking, but certainly it appears that his friends have maybe imbibed a bit too much that night. There he is, a picture of him skiing in the bottom corner there. At a Heritage Days festival, wearing a traditional Saudi headdress, driving a convertible. This monk loves to drive convertibles. And then my personal favorite photo of him on the John Deere tractor, right, or lawnmower, I guess. Right? And so here you see that he appears to contradict our expectation about what monks look like or the types of activities in which monks engage. And part of the reason for this, of course, is because like Christianity, like Islam, like any religion, Buddhism is a living religion. It's made up of living, breathing, real people. And real people, as we know, have messy lives, right? They lie, they cheat, they steal, they betray each other, they fall in love, they fall out of love. All of these things are part and parcel of being a real person in the world. In our country today, of course, a lot of real people are engaged in debates about sort of the role of religion in the public sphere and the role of religion in politics. And particularly, many of these debates recently have turned towards the topic of who and which religions should have access to public spaces and to political mobilization. There are some who say that we should promote religious freedom as an inalienable right, and others who say that this is a country that is God's country, founded on Judeo-Christian values. And these all too familiar debates are not new, nor are they restricted to Western countries. In fact, in Thailand, a predominantly Buddhist country with a significant Muslim minority, we see very similar conversations and debates are being undertaken about the role of religion in the public world and the role of sort of the question of who should have a right to speak on behalf of certain religious traditions in public spaces. So if we look at the religious demographics of Thailand, one of the things that you'll see is that, that 93%, or a very significant majority of the country, are Buddhist. Thai Buddhists tend to be Theravada Buddhists, and this population includes both those who are understood to be ethnically Thai and Thai Chinese ethnics. About 14% of the country is made up of people who consider themselves to have either partial or full Chinese ancestry. But more or less, they all practice Buddhism, and they all practice a form of Theravada Buddhism, which we'll be discussing in a minute. 5.8% of the country is Muslim. Now, the Thai's Muslim minority sort of reside throughout the country, but in many ways, they're concentrated in the south, right? So there are some Muslims who live there's a significant Muslim population in Bangkok and a population of Muslim Chinese in the north. But the majority of the country's Muslims live in sort of the southernmost 3 provinces on the border with the country directly below, Malaysia. And they speak a form of Malaysian language that is different from the Thai language. So it's not only that they understand themselves to be religiously different from the larger majority, they also see themselves as linguistically and ethnically different. And this, of course, is part of or comes out of a long history in which that region was originally part of what's known as the Pattani dynasty that existed for several centuries. For most of the time, it had a tributary relationship with Thailand, which was then Siam, and it was given to or annexed by the British and given to the Thai government at the turn of the 20th century. So since the mid-20th century, there has been a lot of calls for sovereignty amongst those living in those bottom provinces, this Muslim minority who are majority there, to sort of have the land returned to independent rule, or to have additional rights extended to them based on language, based on religion, based on a desire for further political autonomy. So today I'm going to do three things. I'm going to speak very briefly about Buddhism, specifically the type of Buddhism that we see in Thailand. Then I'm going to speak a little bit more about the conflict that's taking place in that area between the Thai and Malaysian border. And then I'm going to ask you to think about the role of representation and the ways that Buddhism, particularly monks within Buddhism, are mobilized for political purposes, either those of the state or, as we'll see, also their own. So all of that in 30 minutes or less, right? Sound good? All right, so often when Westerners travel to historically Buddhist countries, they will note that religion isn't necessarily actively practiced. They often will equate it with the way that Christianity is considered part of the heritage or the history of European nations, but isn't necessarily an active, living, breathing part of the current society. And so Westerners will often say the same is the case when it comes to Buddhist countries. Thailand, however, is the exception. It is deeply embedded in the lives of everyday individuals. And while technically there is no state religion in Thailand, Buddhism is the de facto state religion in this country. The king, for example, is required to be Buddhist, and the monks themselves play a really significant role in the government, often as advisors or in other forms of administrative work. So they're very much so embedded into the political structure of the country and have been for a very long time. Buddhism is thought to have arrived in Thailand sometime around the year 250 BCE, and the prominent form, as we've already said, is what's known as Theravada Buddhism. Theravada means the way of the elders, and it considers itself to be the original and the most authentic form of Buddhism, the closest to that which the Buddha himself would have practiced. Today there are approximately 100 million adherents worldwide of Theravada, so roughly 30% of the world's Buddhist population are part of Theravada, the rest being part of Mahayana, which is a second form of Buddhism. It's often referred to as Southern Buddhism because it's concentrated in Southeast Asia, so countries like Laos, Cambodia, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, and of course Thailand are where we find the majority of the world's Theravada Buddhists. And so in that way, it's sometimes thought to be more of an ethnic form of Buddhism, as opposed to Mahayana, which we find around the world in various different forms. Westerners also sometimes refer to it as Catholic Buddhism, or the closest form of Buddhism that we have to Catholicism. Again, because unlike its counterpart Mahayana Buddhism, it doesn't have a number of different sects. It considers itself to be one direct lineage to the Buddha himself. When we talk about atheism in Buddhism, it's usually Theravada Buddhism to which people are referring, right? When people define Buddhism as an atheist tradition, it's Theravada because the tradition says there are no gods and says that in the context where someone believes in gods, it's a problem because it's a form of superstition and is counterproductive to the Dharma. They have various rituals where they will venerate holy people, but they don't see those holy people as gods in and of themselves. The most important components then are the monks, the religious leaders. In Theravada Buddhism, the only way in which you can escape from the cycle of death and birth and rebirth is to become a monk and to achieve enlightenment, right? So only monks, and only male monks, obviously, are on that path. The rest of us, those of us who have not been born into a circumstance in which we can become monks, are tasked with various forms of merit-making or accumulating karma so that we might hope to, in the future, be reborn in a situation where we could then become a monk. And so probably you've heard this term karma referred to either in popular culture or those of you who have taken religious studies classes. And while we tend to think of it as ethical action, that's not exactly correct. One is more likely to gain karma through various ritual actions. And it's usually we refer to it as merit. So you're gaining various forms of merit so as to hopefully have a better rebirth in your next life. There are a couple of different ritual actions. The first is almsgiving. So if you've seen these similar images to this one of the monks with begging bowls, that's precisely what it is. Historically, this was the most common and important way for Buddhists to gain some sort of merit. Monks would go out every morning, collect food in their bowls, and that would feed them and sustain their community for the day. It's very rare today in most Buddhist countries to see the monks out gathering food unless it's in a touristy area or on a special occasion. Again, Thailand is the exception. When you're traveling in Thailand, those of you who are going on the trip, you will likely see the monks out collecting food as it is really ingrained in their culture. Second form of merit making is a ceremony called the denna ceremony. Denna is the Sanskrit term for giving, and it involves a process of usually inviting one or several monks into your home. Sometimes they'll occur in the temple or at a famous pilgrimage site, but usually it's in the home. And the devotees will begin by washing the monks' feet, and if there are nuns present, they'll have their feet washed as well. And then they'll come in, and the monk will attach a string to an image of the Buddha on the altar. The monk will hold the string, and then all of the laity present will also hold on to the string. He will deliver a series of chants or prayers, give a special dharma or wisdom talk, and then in that process, his merit will be transferred on to the laity who are there, right, sort of through the string itself. And this image is an image I found of a denna ceremony in upstate New York. And I don't know if you can see it, but he's got some bananas there. And they have a number of boxes of Q-tips. And I'm not sure what the spiritual significance of Q-tips is, but I expect it must be very important, right? All right, so that's one. If it's not clear, monks are incredibly important and really probably the most important part of Theravada Buddhism. The other way that one can gain merit that is practiced par excellence in Thailand is what's known as temporary ordination. So temporary ordination is a ritual designed for men where they will take on the vows of a monk for a limited period of time. Usually, or traditionally, this would be done sort of before marriage, and they spend some time in the monastery. In most Theravada Buddhist countries today, it is not practiced very frequently. In Burma, for example, which is where my friend is originally from, although he lives in the United States now, they do it with children. So you can see here he is with a Burmese boy. You can see the picture here. He's meditating, and his charge has fallen asleep, which he told me he was just so cute, I couldn't wake him up. And there he is, wrapping him, teaching him sort of how to wrap himself in the monk's robes. And of course, it was also a time to sort of have some fun and bond. And so the picture in the far corner is of them at Niagara Falls looking into the viewfinder. And so often in Burmese communities, this will be done for a child when they're young, and it almost has a summer camp type feel to it. They've tried to rejuvenate it in Sri Lanka, but with limited success. But in Thailand, it is something that is practiced regularly and taken quite seriously. In Thailand, young men, usually just after they finish high school, will take the monk's vows, and they'll do it in some sort of variation or derivative of 3. So you might take it for 3 days, 3 weeks, 3 months, or 3 years. And it's important because it introduces them or gives them options to, when they return from their temporary ordination, take an important role in the society in which they find themselves. While they're in the process of being temporarily ordained and living at the monastery, they'll have an extra opportunity to learn how to read and write and to be trained in religious education. When they come back to their community, they'll have access to political prestige. As we've said, it's almost a chance for them to network because, as we've said, the monks are part of the government structure and the political system. So someone with political ambitions would want to spend a significant period of time with these influential figures. And it also makes the men into better husbands or more desirable husbands, right? This is what turns them into sort of hot men, right? The term they use is ripe. After you have gone on your ordination, you are a ripe man as opposed to an unripe man, which you can take what you want. In Thailand today, there are 2 organizations that one can make use of in order to take part in this process. The first is the Mahayana, which is an organization that has ancient roots in Sri Lanka and for a long time was the only forum that people were able to use for any form of ordination. And the second is the Dhammayuttika Nikaya. And this is a forum or an organization that was instigated by the king in the 19th century. And this king is the great-great-great-grandfather of the current king. And even though it's the smaller forum, it's the one that has the more political power or the greater political prestige. So someone who has career ambitions that are politically oriented or to be a great, famous, successful individual would probably choose to be part of the Dhammayuttika Nikaya as opposed to the Mahanikaya because it would give them sort of better exposure. It's also considered the more conservative and the more nationalistic version, again, because it has this lineage that comes directly from the king as opposed to the one that is more ancient. So this decision to take on temporary ordination is tied into a larger cultural assumption that equates monks with nationalism. And they serve, therefore, as powerful political and religious symbols in almost a way that is similar to the way that we think of the American flag or members of the military in our context. There's sort of an automatic reaction in Thailand that those of you who are going on the trip will likely be able to note. But it has an even sort of greater significance because along with being a nationally potent symbol, it's also one that is personally profound, right? Almost everyone in the country has taken this temporary ordination, and so they're able to sort of situate themselves within the monk's role and see themselves reflected in the monk as a person, right? So the monks play a really important role in the country. Now, over the last 20 years, this interlacing between the monks and this religious nationalism has become increasingly relevant, especially as we see the increase in political activity in the southern part of the country. In several instances, there have been moments of violence erupting on the part of Malay Muslims against Buddhist figures, particularly the state. So education facilities, so state-run schools, the temples themselves, and most frequently police stations or against police officers. In 2001, there was a national Patani guerrilla group that was activated, and they organized a series of coordinated attacks, bombings, intimidations, and a couple of drive-by shootings that warranted the arrival of the Thai military to this area in order to intervene and attempt to sort of reestablish peace. Thai military were unprepared and did not have a really firm grasp on the local culture. So along with a significant amount of political and religious unrest in this region, there's also a significant amount of drug use, and many of those who coordinate the drug trade are the police officers, and as we shall see, some of the monks themselves. So the military had arrived to sort of rescue the police and the monks, and they themselves were resistant to this. So the army's response was disproportionate. They conducted a number of raids on Muslim villages. There were reports of beatings, of rapes, and of burning down Islamic schools. And in retaliation, on January 22nd, 2004, a Buddhist monk was killed by some rebels. And 2 days later, 3 more figures were killed. The entire country became sort of engrossed in outrage. In response, the then Queen Sirikit, decided to politically mobilize the monks. She gave a very famous speech on her birthday that year, in which she said, "Even Buddhist monks have been killed. I don't want people to sit still. I myself have come out to speak." And so her solution was to endorse a new volunteer monk program, wherein monks from around the country were asked to spend 3 months of every year in the southern region with an intention to increase the visual mobility of the monks themselves, right, to make them more visible in the area. According to Michael Jerrison, who's a professor at Youngstown University and has studied this topic, there were 2 types of monks who were attracted to this option. The first were those who had a high amount of nationalism and patriotism and saw going to the south as part of their duty to the Queen and to the country. And the second were those who were looking to sort of use it as a way to build up their career, accumulate wealth and fame. And Jerrison argues that neither of these were perhaps the most altruistic motivations, and that it did not help the situation. So the introduction of the Queen's Project monks, along with 2 really devastating attacks on Muslim sites, changed or shifted the public understanding of religion. So the next slide I'm going to show you is another slide that might be disturbing to some. So if you are a little bit sensitive, perhaps look at me as opposed to, or look at the wall, I guess, as opposed to the slides. Okay. So in 2004, there were 2 attacks. The first was the Krusa Mosque incident in April. And this occurred after 100 insurgents were involved in a coordinated attack on 10 different police officers or police stations. 30 of those insurgents ran to the Krusa Mosque in order to hide out. This is in the area considered to be one of the most holy mosques or the holiest sites for Malay Muslims in the area. And the Thai military went in and killed everyone who was there. Later investigations revealed that those who had been killed had previously had their hands sort of tied together and had been shot execution style in the head. And this began to change the way that regular Thai people thought about what the role of religion was. Because here was this instance where the military, first of all, was breaking international laws, but secondly, doing it in a religious site, which from their perspective made them no better than those who had previously been perceived to be the enemy. A second incident occurred known as the Tukbai incident a couple months later. In that context, about 7 or 8 men were arrested for manufacturing and selling guns, and a peaceful protest followed. The police were concerned about the demonstration, even though it was, by all reports, a peaceful demonstration, and so they called the military for backup. The military, brought in tear gas, shot the crowds with water cannons, and ended up arresting several hundred people. In the process of the arrest, they were forced to sort of lie down, and they had their hands tied together again. And in the heat of the day, while they were trying to transport them from this location to another location several hours away, a number of men suffocated and died. And again, this mobilized the general public to say, what are we doing? This doesn't sound like what it means to be Buddhist. And part of the result was that the monks themselves became politically mobilized. For the first time, we saw a shift where several monks, not all, but several, began to be overtly critical of the state and of the ruling power. In 2007, a number of monks participated in a demonstration outside of Parliament, and you can see the image on the left here. They're actually reading the newspaper story about their own demonstration and calling for political reform. And then a year later, in 2008, several monks marched in the streets asking for free elections, right? As the government was beginning to dissolve, the monks themselves were an important political player in ensuring democracy or in attempting to ensure democracy. So in this context, the monks began to sort of mobilize for good, but not all was good, as we will see. More recently, there have been several instances of what I like to call monks gone wild, which you can actually Google it, and you can Google it safely. I did it just before I came over here, and it's all safe for work things. But one of the things that will come up is this video here of these two monks from 2013 who were monks from the Northeast on a private jet, and they're kind of dancing around and partying. You can see he's got these sunglasses on and a designer handbag, and he's kind of got this rebel without a cause attitude. And so a lot of criticism in the media when this video was posted on YouTube about, they're supposed to not be involved in these self-indulgent, luxurious lifestyles were raised. Additionally, a number of the monks who had moved to the southern provinces themselves began to criticize what was going on in the southern monasteries. One of the informants that Michael Jarrison interviewed said that there was an instance in which several monks had been attacked in a monastery, and the government had previously declared that it was a terrorist attack or an insurgent attack by Malay Muslims. But when Jarrison began to interview other monks at nearby monasteries, they said, no, those monks are just all doing a lot of drugs and drinking, and they couldn't pay their tab. And so, yes, they were being attacked by Malay Muslims, but it was over a drug deal gone bad, not a political or national cause. And here you can see in February of this year, a much beloved abbot of a monastery was accused of money laundering. And it was something that brought, again, national outrage, partially because he was such a beloved figure in the monastic community in the area. And so finally we see the ways that these images of monks that have been so prevalent across time in the Thai tradition and the Thai world are starting to shift to larger audiences. So again, that abbot who was accused of money laundering, his community launched a massive campaign in support of him, where they feel that they're being silenced, and they have a sign there that says, "The day has come for the world to know how much we love in Buddhism." And there have been frequent demonstrations against Muslims across sort of the southeast region. And you can see this monk here from a riot in 2013, or a demonstration in 2013, saying, "The world is not only for Muslims." And in this context, what is particularly interesting is that the signs are in what language? In English, right? So who is the presumed audience for them? Right? We're seeing that the very way that they were originally mobilized as tools of the Thai state and to support the state's cause, they're now reversing or subverting those actions and using them on a larger international audience. Right? So for those of you who are going on the trip or for our interest in this lecture series, thinking about global engagement, this is a really interesting moment where we see a localized religious conflict magnified to an international level. So these are all things I'd like us to think about. In conclusion, My friend always wants me to show my students a picture of him baking Christmas cookies and wearing a Santa hat. So he says I can use any pictures of him that I want as long as I show this picture because he loves it so much. He says, I am the Christmas monk. So thank you. Questions? Yep.
So I'm curious, what does your friend who's the monk do that pertains to being a monk? I mean, I'm sure are there like daily rituals that he follows alongside other activities such as baking cookies?
Yeah, so he grew up in Bangladesh, and he was part of an ethnic community called the Marma people who were forcibly exiled by the Bengali government from their home. And so at a young age, he was given to a monastery, or his parents left him with a monastery. Because he showed great promise for as a Buddhist intellectual, they sent him on to Burma, and he did studies there, and then was actually able to come to the United States a little over a decade ago on a refugee status, refugee visa. And from there, he has degrees from the University of Colorado, or Narapo University in Colorado, and the University of Toronto. He's currently working on a PhD from Arizona State University, but I'm not sure how much work he's doing on it. He spends a lot of time consulting and leading retreats. He does a lot of work with the United Nations. He's kind of a superstar. He's like my coolest friend, right? And so he's like, but because of that, he's often not as good a monk as most Theravada monks would be. But he does do the regular meditations. He's up in the morning at 4 doing his meditations and participating regularly in the life of the community. But he has some sort of extra allowances because he's seen as this great intellectual. Does that answer that question? Other questions?
On the temporary ordination process, is it more of a personal choice or a family-oriented decision?
That's a really good question. And I think probably most people, the answer is probably both and, right? As is the case for you in your world, right? The decisions you make, well, certainly you make them as independent agents are often influenced by your families. But particularly in Thailand, where they're doing it as young men, 17, 18, 19 years old, it's supposed to be a personal choice. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Are the differences in different sects of Buddhism as distinct as those in Christianity or other religions?
Again, that's kind of yes and no. From the perspective of Western culture, you might say yes, right? If we look at Mahayana Buddhism, which is, it calls itself the greater vehicle, and it encompasses a number of different types of Buddhism. If you're familiar with Zen Buddhism, that gets encapsulated into it. Some people put Tibetan Buddhism under Mahayana as well, although some people think of it as a separate category. But there are versions of it that have gods, there are versions of it that have no gods. There are versions of Mahayana Buddhism where you yourself can be reborn as a god. So that sounds very different. That sounds certainly much more different than the difference between Church of Christ and a Baptist. But in some, they probably would say, actually, no, it's not that different. So they would say, oh, it's all the same. We're all part of the wheel of samsara, the cycle of birth and death and rebirth. So they maybe wouldn't see those distinctions.
I'm curious if you've ever talked to anyone who is a woman practicing Buddhism and her thoughts about not ever reaching a state of being a monk. For most sects that don't allow a woman to become a monk. What is that like in your thoughts of a woman to never be able to reach that state?
What are my thoughts personally as a scholar?
Yeah, personally as a scholar.
Well, so as a scholar, it's it is what the tradition teaches. I'm also, though, because my own interest is in people who break the rules, which is why he and I are such good friends, I'm actually really interested in, there are Buddhist nuns who have sought to take on the vows of ordination that are reserved just for monks, and we see that within the Terawatt and the Mahayana tradition, and so they're kind of, the rebels of the community. So we see those instances. We see like sort of a space of that changing and growing, similarly to the ways many other religions, once feminist thoughts are introduced, contend with them. So at the back, and then.
So you were talking about the criticism of the overindulgent monk just a little while ago. Do you feel like these criticisms of the overindulgence has increased or decreased as technology and just indulgent behaviors in general have become more normalized?
That's a good question. Yeah, so I think probably it's more widespread, right? Yeah. I think that monks behaving badly has increased or decreased? No, I think they've probably, as in all cultures, people have been behaving badly for a long time, but getting caught. The year that the monks on the plane were found, one of my colleagues looked for a report, and there were 300 cases of monks who had been disciplined either for consuming alcohol, drug use, sexual encounters with prostitutes, or sort of just overindulgence in life itself. So I think these are probably always happening, but people are hearing about it more. And because the monks have become this contentious symbol, it's probably capturing the Thai media's attention and now the world's attention in ways that it hadn't previously. All right, there were a couple questions here, yeah?
In the same vein as her with the gender issue, are the feminist ideas prevalent in our society, or is it still like a new...
Is the what?
The female monks. You had mentioned that there were some who wanted to undergo the process. Is that
the question of like women's ordination goes back to the time of the Buddha. So the Buddha was originally opposed to women's ordination, and the reason he gave was that he thought that it would distract men from the path to enlightenment. And then his mother was the one who convinced him, his mother was the one who eventually convinced him that women should be allowed to be ordained as nuns. And so the difference between a monk and a nun in the Buddhist tradition is not the same difference that we see between a priest and a nun in the Catholic Church. It's a difference in the degree of vows that one is capable or permitted to take, as opposed to different roles, although it ends up being a difference as roles as well. So yeah, there are historical circumstances where women dressed up as men and pretended to be monks. So I think that's always been within the tradition, but certainly again, as they've received a lot of input and support from feminists around the world, they're having more capability to sort of act on it.
Is that prevalent in the society today, or is that like a small minority opinion?
That's a good question. I think it would depend on what society you were in. So it would depend on what society you were in and probably who you were asking. So yeah, there's probably in more remote rural areas, there's not a lot of women advocating for that. Of course, in the contemporary world, maybe women who who are frustrated with the lack of options for ordination, they also have the option of just leaving the tradition completely, right, and becoming secular and not having to attend to it. Yeah.
One more. Does this bleed over into like political representation?
Into what?
Political representation of the government? Because it seemed like the Queen had power based on some of your earlier slides.
Yeah, so she passed away recently within the last little bit, but she was much beloved around the country. And since her death, there's really been a vacuum of power. There's been sort of upheavals of the parliamentary system that they have and sort of distress over the royal family and its role. So Thailand is in a time of transition right now, which is really exciting.
Yeah, in regards to the military and them raiding the Muslim mosques or the mosques, how do they fix the, I guess you say, the blurred line between the institutions and their ideals of Buddhism?
How do the military?
How do they go about fixing the blurred lines between the states as an institution and their belief or their ideal as being Buddhist?
That's a really good question. I'm not sure that they've done that as well as they could. I think they have attempted to sort of, when we make a mistake, be like, oh, I'm not going to do that again. But they have a lot of work to do. And it's being further complicated, of course, now that the monks are starting to realize how much political power they have beyond their traditional, very conservative role serving in the administration, the government. And so we don't know what's going to happen, right? The Buddhist world is kind of in this time of really exciting transition. The Dalai Lama is getting quite old, and we don't have a clear successor for him. And certainly that speaks just to Tibetan Buddhism, but I think that we'll see ripple effects when he passes away to the rest of the Buddhist world as well. So there might be a lot of changes, which is why you should all take courses in religious studies to learn more about it.
Do you think this is an enlightenment that could cause a regime change between kings and queens into something else?
Do I think, pardon?
With this, how they're trying to find new landscape, do you think that this is an enlightenment that they're having to where they might have a regime change?
Oh, yeah, there have been some people who have equated it with sort of the Thai, like, Arab Spring or what was called the American Fall. There is sort of this sense that they're trying to instill a stronger democracy. And in some cases, the monks themselves are saying, we don't want to be these political figures who have all of the power. Give the power to the people. It's, that's what democracy looks like. And then in the back.
Yeah, I was just curious, you mentioned prostitution, and our media leads us to believe that Thailand has a real problem with sex trafficking. Does the Buddhist religion have an official stance on that, and are they actively engaged in trying to discourage the sex trades?
So monks are not supposed to be having sex of any sort. What the Buddhist stance on sex trafficking is, I would say that it would fall under the category of sort of harming. Probably most monks would say it falls under a category of harming, undue harm onto another person, which, according to Buddhist teachings, is not permissible. So, no, we're good. All right, great. Thank you, guys.